Hi everyone, soy Anna, and if you'd asked me a year ago to describe my life, I would have told you it was quiet in the very best way. I had a husband, Daniel, who knew how I took my coffee and which playlists to put on when I couldn't sleep. We had a small apartment with a crooked balcony that caught the evening light just right. I kept fresh eucalyptus in a vase on the kitchen island. He kept the spice rack alphabetized like a librarian with OCD. We weren't flashy, we were us, and for a long time that felt unshakable. Our mornings had a rhythm I could have set a metronome to. I woke first, padded to the kitchen in fuzzy socks, and started the kettle. Daniel liked to pretend he didn't hear me, so I'd stand at the bedroom door with his mug and say, "Get up, or I'll drink both." He'd groan dramatically, sit up, and kiss the rim of the cup just to annoy me. On Fridays, we swapped. He made pancakes. I handled the syrup diplomacy because he poured like a 6-year-old at a birthday party. We argued about stupid things, the right way to load a dishwasher. Whether cilantro tastes like soap, it does not. Daniel, and then we'd laugh, and it would be nothing. I tell you this because betrayals don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in the middle of routines you trust with your eyes closed. When we got married, money was simple. We kept a joint account for bills and groceries, and our separate accounts for our own little indulgences. Transparency without invasion. We were equal, same number of keys on the hook, same number of pillows dented each night. If one of us worked late, the other saved dinner and a story. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. The first odd flicker was small enough to ignore. Daniel started setting his phone face down. Not in an obvious way, more like an absent habit. Tap, screen dark, face down on the table. I noticed it once. Then again, then enough times to file it under that new thing he does. When I asked, half teasing, "Who are you hiding, celebrity chef?" he laughed, kissed my forehead, and said his team had started using a new messaging app with too many notifications. Reasonable. Everything was reasonable then. He also began staying late at work, not every night, but more often than our old normal. He's a project manager at a firm that seems to run on emergencies. So we're pushing a deadline didn't sound like code for anything. He'd text a picture of takeout in compostable boxes, a row of exhausted faces, a conference room whiteboard, bleeding marker. I'd send back a thumbs up and a "you got this," the kind of faith you think love is built on. Then came the change. In conversations. Not an argument, not silence. Just skimming the surface. If I brought up a weekend trip, he'd say, "Let's see how the month shakes out." If I mentioned finally replacing the couch that squeaked after this quarter, there's a tone people use when they're answering the question they wish you'd asked instead of the one you actually did. He started using that tone. I remember the exact night my stomach learned something my brain wasn't ready to say out loud. It was a Tuesday-only note because tacos were on the plan, and Daniel is religious about Taco Tuesdays. He texted around 6, running behind, don't wait. I still cooked, because when your hands are busy, your head is quieter. At 8:20, the door opened and he came in smelling like air-conditioned offices and too cold coffee. He hugged me, quick, perfunctory, and headed straight to the shower. His phone chimed on the counter. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The preview lit up just long enough to read a name I didn't recognize. Jules, and 3 words. Got the transfer. Do you know that sound a glass makes when it cracks but doesn't shatter? That's what my chest did. Not because I had proof 3 words or a Rorschach test, but because every tiny thing that had felt off suddenly organized itself into a pattern. The late nights, the turned over phone, the skimming answers. Got the transfer. When he came back to the kitchen, hair damp, sleeves pushed up like nothing was wrong. I was measuring salt with ridiculous precision. He kissed the top of my head, reached past me for a tortilla, and said, "Smells amazing." I looked at him and heard myself say, perfectly even, "Whose jewels?" He blinked, just once, then smiled fast. "Client's assistant." We moved their maintenance budget into a new platform. It's a mess. He took a bite of taco, chewed, kept his body language loose in that deliberate way people do when they're acting natural. I nodded, and I let it go. Out loud. Inside, a part of me took notes. I didn't become a detective. I didn't install spyware or stalk. That's not who I am. But I started paying attention the way you do after you stub your toe on a piece of furniture. You learn exactly where it is, even in the dark. Daniel stopped, leaving his laptop open on the coffee table. He locked his phone with a passcode, where before it had been a lazy swipe. He volunteered less. I asked fewer questions. We settled into a choreography of avoidance. On a rainy Saturday, I did laundry and found a receipt in his jean pocket for a wine bar across town. Not cheap. 2 glasses of something French I couldn't pronounce. He hates French reds. I placed the receipt on the dresser, like a pressed leaf, and stared at it long enough to memorize the time stamp. Thursday. 10:12 p.m. He'd told me Thursday. He'd had microwave burritos with his team in the break room. That night, he curled around me in sleep, the way he always had, and I lay there cataloguing the differential between the body that held me and the life it was living outside our bedroom. I tried to pray. What came out was a list. Please let this be stress. Please let this be temporary. Please don't let me be a fool. The next week, he suggested consolidating household information. It came out of nowhere while we were unloading. Groceries. We should make a folder, he said, casual. Bank logins, insurance, passwords, just in case. I looked up from the avocados. In case of what? He shrugged, nonchalant. Adulting, emergencies. I wanted to say, we're not the folder kind of couple. We've never been the folder kind of couple. Instead, I said, sure, email me what you have. He didn't. I wish I could tell you I was brave then, that I confronted him with a speech about trust and transparency. I didn't. I made dinner. I went to work. I paid bills. I answered texts from my sister about baby shower centerpieces, and from my best friend about her promotion. I kept moving like a shark, because sharks that stop moving sink. What finally tilted me from suspicion to strategy wasn't a lipstick stain or a hotel charge. It was a spreadsheet. On the last day of the month, I opened the joint account to schedule our utilities and saw a series of transfers, small, frequent, marked with generic notes: reimburse, misc, errand. The pattern was what hit me. Round numbers, evenly spaced, the kind you set on autopilot when you don't want to think, or when you don't want someone else to notice. I sat very still. Then I did the least dramatic thing in the world. I made tea. I took out a notebook. I wrote dates and amounts. When Daniel walked in, I closed the laptop and asked how his day was. He kissed my cheek and said, "Long you," I said, quiet. The word tasted like a lie. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan and made a decision that felt like jumping into icy water. I was going to protect myself. Not attack, not accuse. Protect. If I was wrong, no harm done. If I was right, then at least one of us would land on our feet. The next morning, I called an attorney. Not the kind with commercials on buses. The kind whose office smells like old wood and certainty. I didn't give him a soap opera. I gave him facts. He gave me options. Clean, boring, powerful options. Trusts, titles, beneficiaries. You don't need to blow anything up, he said. You just need to weatherproof what's already yours. I left his office with a folder and a sadness so heavy it felt like a coat. There is a particular grief that comes from doing the right thing for yourself when you wish you didn't have to. I went to my mother's after work under the pretense of borrowing a bunt pan and asked if she could store a few documents for me for a while. She looked at me the way only mothers do, X-ray and soft, and said, of course, without asking a single dangerous question. For the first time in weeks, I slept. Not well, but like someone who has put sandbags by the door before the storm. And that's how the marriage I thought I knew began to feel like a house I still lived in, while quietly drawing the new blueprint in my pocket. I didn't know exactly what was coming. I only knew this. If a door was about to slam, I wanted to be standing on the right side of it. In the days that followed, I stayed in this strange limbo. It's a place where you know something's wrong, but you don't have all the pieces yet. My heart raced every time I noticed something new, teeny, insignificant things that in hindsight felt like clues in a treasure hunt. But instead of leading to something good, they were guiding me toward a truth I wasn't ready to face. One afternoon, Daniel came home from work later than usual. I didn't make a big deal out of it, because this had become the norm. What struck me, though, was how his mood had shifted. He was still polite, but there was a coolness to him. His eyes seemed distant, as if he was already halfway out the door emotionally, even though he was still physically here. And when I tried to talk to him about something as mundane as dinner plans, his responses were clipped, brief. Yeah, well, see, he would say. Maybe later. It wasn't like him. Daniel had always been the type to indulge my random thoughts, even if they were about the most trivial things. But now, there was a wall between us that I couldn't break through. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was tired, stressed from work. Maybe something happened in the office that I didn't know about. But as the days turned into weeks, the distance grew. I caught him slipping his phone into his pocket as I entered the room, or quickly locking it when he stepped away for a moment. This wasn't normal. He wasn't hiding anything overt, but the little actions spoke volumes. Then, one night, I found something. It wasn't much at first. Just a random series of texts between him and a woman I didn't recognize. At first glance, nothing seemed too out of place. Casual, friendly exchanges. But one text caught my attention. I'll make it up to you when I can. Just hold tight. My stomach dropped. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Why would he be talking like that to someone else? I dismissed it at first, telling myself I was being paranoid. But the feeling lingered. The texts kept coming. I'd catch glimpses of names like Sophie or Jess as I walked by, but I didn't dare confront him. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face whatever truth lay behind those texts. Then came the strange change in his schedule. He started going on work trips with increasing frequency. At first, I didn't think much of it, but the more he left, the more distant he became, and every time he came back, he was colder than before. When I asked about these trips, he gave vague answers, nothing concrete. Just some meetings, he would say, nothing to worry about. But I couldn't ignore the way his phone would ring constantly while he was away. When I pressed him about it, he'd brush it off, saying it was just work-related calls. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the full truth. One evening, when he was away on one of these trips, I took a deep breath and did something I never thought I'd do. I checked his messages. I had to know if my suspicions were justified. What I found made my blood run cold. There, in black and white, were the messages between him and Sophie. There was talk of meetings, yes, but also personal conversations, playful texts, and things I could only describe as flirtatious. Miss you, one text said. Can't wait to see you again. It's been too long. Another one read, you're my favorite distraction. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't harmless banter. This was a full-blown emotional affair, and I was the last one to know. My heart raced as I tried to process what I was seeing. The man I had built a life with, the man I trusted, had been living a double life. And for months I had been blind to it. I felt numb. How could I have been so oblivious? How could I have ignored all the little signs? The texts, the phone calls, the late nights. It all made sense now. My mind raced as I tried to put the pieces together. Sophie, this wasn't just a fling. This was something deeper. They were planning something. I could feel it in my gut. I closed the phone and took a deep breath. I wasn't ready to confront him yet. I needed more. I needed proof. I couldn't just go in blindly. So I started keeping track of everything, his movements, his phone, his emails. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me anymore. The woman I thought I knew was slipping away from me, and I needed to protect myself. I knew it was coming, but I wasn't sure how it would play out. Would he confess? Would he deny it? I didn't know, but I was determined to find out. And when the time came, I would be ready. Because in the end, I wasn't going to let him walk away with everything. I wasn't going to be the fool who let her life fall apart without fighting for it. 2 days. That's how long I lasted before I knew I had to confront him. The pieces of the puzzle kept coming together, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't just reacting out of paranoia, I was acting on cold, hard facts. That morning, as I sat in the living room, I made a decision. I was no longer going to play along with the illusion that everything was fine. I had to take control. And the first step was to figure out everything I could before confronting him. I began by going over the bank statements again. This time, I wasn't just scanning for a few odd withdrawals. I was looking for patterns, for anything out of place, anything that could give me an insight into what was happening behind my back. I was meticulous, going through every transaction, and there it was, a series of payments, small, seemingly innocent amounts. $200 here, $500 there. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then I realized these amounts were being withdrawn from our joint account at odd hours. Why would Daniel be making these payments without telling me? Was he hiding something? It didn't take long before I found something that made my stomach twist. One of the payments was marked with a memo I didn't recognize, for Sophie's wedding gift. Sophie, my heart sank. I had seen that name over and over in the text messages, but seeing it tied to a payment made it real. Sophie wasn't just someone he had been texting. She was someone he was financially supporting, as if they had something I wasn't a part of. I quickly opened the email account he had set up for bills, just to see if there was any correspondence I had missed. That's when I stumbled across another bombshell letter from the bank. It was addressed to Daniel, and it was about a new joint account. I stared at it, not fully understanding. Why had he opened a new account without telling me? I have not seen any transactions from this account before. It took everything in me not to crumble right there. I stared at the screen for minutes that felt like hours. I knew I had to act, but my mind raced with what I had found. I couldn't confront him just yet. I needed more evidence. I decided to take a deeper dive into his phone. If I was going to expose the truth, I had to have everything. I knew it was risky snooping through his personal stuff, but at that point, I had no choice. The betrayal was staring me in the face, and I had to be sure. I took a deep breath before I picked up his phone. It was sitting face down on the kitchen counter, just like always. I unlocked it, quickly scrolling through the messages. What I found took my breath away. In the text thread between Daniel and Sophie, the conversation had turned from innocent to chilling. Sophie was pressing him about finalizing their plans for the future. She was talking about leaving her husband for him. They had been talking about how they were going to start fresh once the divorce was finalized. And there, in black and white, was her demand. I need this to be over. Once you tell her, You need to walk away and not look back. If we're going to start fresh, we can't keep hiding. I sat frozen, the phone in my hands shaking. The worst part, it was clear that Daniel had every intention of following through. With this plan, he had been leading me on while simultaneously planning his escape with her. I closed the phone, my hands still trembling. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The man I had trusted with everything was planning to leave me. Not just emotionally, but financially as well. He was already making moves behind the scenes, preparing to walk away with Sophie, while I had been completely oblivious to it all. I needed to confront him. The truth had been laid bare before me, and I could no longer pretend that everything was fine. I waited for Daniel to come home that evening, steeling myself for what was to come. My heart raced, but I knew I had to stay calm. I couldn't let him manipulate the situation again. When he walked through the door, I barely looked at him. He went to give me a quick hug, but I stepped back. "Daniel," I said quietly, trying to steady my voice, "we need to talk." His face shifted. He knew something was wrong. He set his bag down and turned to face me. "What's going on, Anna?" he asked, his tone guarded. He knew I was upset, but I could tell he wasn't prepared for what was coming. "I know about Sophie," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I know about the payments, and I know about your plan to leave me." His expression shifted instantly, his face blanching. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "I've seen the messages. I've seen everything. I'm not stupid, Daniel." He stood there in stunned silence, his mouth working like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. I wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. "You've been planning this for months, haven't you?" I continued, each word cutting through the tension. "You and Sophie, you've been planning to leave me and take everything, and you thought I wouldn't find out." I could see his brain working, trying to come up with an excuse, but there was no way out. The evidence was clear, and he knew it. "Anna, he started, his voice faltering. "It wasn't like that. You don't understand." "Then explain it to me, Daniel," I snapped, crossing my arms over my chest. "Explain why you've been transferring money behind my back, opening secret accounts, and lying to me. Explain why you've been emotionally involved with someone else for months. I'm listening." He finally looked away, his shame too great to bear. He opened his mouth again, but no words came out. He was silent, defeated. The silence between us was suffocating. It felt like time had stopped, and the weight of everything I had discovered pressed down on both of us. Finally, I spoke, my voice colder than I had intended. "I'm done, Daniel. The marriage is over, and I'm not going to be the one to pay for your mistakes." As I walked out of the room, I felt an odd sense of relief wash over me. I had confronted the truth. I had faced it head on, and now I knew exactly where I stood. But what would come next? That I wasn't sure of yet. But I was ready for whatever the future held. After the confrontation, the air between Daniel and I was thick with tension. I knew that I had to act fast. I couldn't trust him to do the right thing anymore. So I had to secure my future before he could make any more moves to take what was mine. I immediately called my lawyer. I hadn't wanted to do this so quickly, but with everything I had found, I couldn't risk losing any more than I already had. My lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Grace, was quick to advise me. "We'll start by freezing your joint accounts and securing everything that's legally yours. No one can touch what's already in your name. We'll also start preparing for the divorce proceedings," she told me over the phone. Her voice was steady, professional, and it calmed my nerves. The next few days were a blur. I moved everything I could into my personal account, leaving just enough in our joint one to keep up appearances. I transferred the car title into my name, changed all of my passwords, and called my mother to ask for help. Nothing big, just asking her to hold onto a few things for me. I didn't want to involve her too deeply, but I needed to be cautious. It wasn't just about the money. It was about preserving the life I had built. Everything that had felt secure was now slipping away, but I wasn't going to let him take it all. Daniel didn't seem to notice at first. Or if he did, he didn't say anything. He kept up his routine, going through the motions of pretending everything was fine. But I saw the cracks in his facade. Every time I looked at him, I saw a man who knew he was losing control of everything he had worked for. On the evening I finalized the last of the transfers, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about protecting myself and taking back control. The following week, Daniel finally spoke up. It wasn't anything big. He just asked about a few small household things. But I saw it his desperation to keep up appearances, his need to maintain the illusion that everything was normal. I couldn't believe how far he'd fallen, how low. He'd gone to manipulate me, to use me as a stepping stone for his own gain. But I had a plan. I was ready. The next step was coming, and I was going to make sure it would be my turn to take control. The day of the divorce mediation arrived, and with it, the final moment of truth. I was ready, but I wasn't prepared for how everything would unfold. When we entered the conference room, Daniel was already there with his lawyer, looking every bit the picture of confident entitlement. I didn't let it bother me. I sat calmly across from him, my lawyer beside me, and I waited for him to make his move. His lawyer, a sharp-suited man, wasted no time diving into his demands. We're requesting half of the house, a portion of Anna's savings and spousal support for the next 2 years, he said, his voice smooth and certain. Daniel, who had been quiet until now, nodded along, looking at me like I was the villain in his story. But I wasn't fazed. I knew what was coming, Grace. My lawyer spoke up, her voice calm but firm. Before we proceed, I think it's important we review something, she said. She slid a stack of papers across the table to Daniel's lawyer. The moment he saw the documents, his confident posture faltered. He quickly flipped through the pages, his face turning from professional to visibly confused. "What is this?" he asked, his voice sharp. Grace remained composed. "These are the transfer documents. The majority of Anna's assets, including the house and investments, were moved into a trust under her mother's name weeks ago. Everything is legally sound." The room fell silent. Daniel's face went pale. He turned to look at me, disbelief written all over his features. "You planned this," he finally choked out. His voice trembled, and I saw the cracks in his facade begin to break open. I didn't respond. I just let the silence linger, letting him process everything. His lawyer glanced at him, then back at me, a look of frustration creeping into his features. "You knew, didn't you?" he said. "You were preparing for this from the start." "Yes," I said quietly, my voice steady. "I wasn't going to sit by and let you take everything I've worked for." I let the words hang in the air, heavy with the truth. Daniel's eyes burned with fury now, but he couldn't hide the defeat. The game was over. His plan had backfired. The days after the mediation were a blur. The truth had come out, and Daniel's plan to take everything from me had crumbled in front of him. The fallout began immediately, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The weight of his betrayal had lifted, but now I had to face the aftermath. Daniel tried to call me several times in the first few days after the mediation, but I didn't pick up. The messages started to come in next, full of apologies and half-hearted pleas. "We need to talk," he'd say. "I'm sorry, Anna. This isn't what I wanted." But I wasn't interested in hearing his excuses anymore. The man I thought I knew had become a stranger, and now there was nothing left between us but the wreckage of our life together. The worst part was how everything had unraveled. His family began calling me too. His brother, who had always been supportive, tried to reach out. "Anna, you've got to understand. He didn't mean for things to go this far," he pleaded. "He's in a bad place." But I didn't want to hear it. I didn't care if Daniel was in a bad place. He had brought this on himself, and I wasn't going to let him manipulate me into feeling sorry for him. I went through the motions of the divorce process. The paperwork, the signing of documents, the back and forth with lawyers. It all felt like a formality at this point. I was walking away with everything I had worked for, and Daniel was left with nothing. His arrogance, his greed, had destroyed his own future. Meanwhile, my life slowly began to rebuild. The house was still mine, as was my savings. I started making plans for the future again. I traveled to places I had always dreamed of, spending time with friends who had supported me through this storm. My confidence returned, and I found peace in knowing that I was strong enough to walk away from the man who had tried to take everything from me. As for Daniel, his calls and messages became less frequent. At first, he seemed desperate, trying to claw his way back into my life. But as the weeks passed, his anger and bitterness grew. He began telling mutual friends that I was the one who had destroyed our marriage, that I had taken everything from him. But the truth was clear to everyone who mattered. He had planned to deceive me, to use me, and when it all fell apart, he blamed me. I didn't let his words affect me. I knew the truth that had cost him everything. One day I ran into his mother at the grocery store. She looked at me, her eyes filled with regret. "I never thought it would come to this, Anna," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought my son would do something like this to you." I nodded. Neither did I, and that was it. There was no more left to say. The marriage was over, the betrayal was laid bare, and now I was moving on. Epilogue, the beginning of something new. It's been 6 months since the divorce was finalized, and life is different. I've learned that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the best outcomes. I'm not bitter anymore. I'm just grateful for the clarity. I'm rebuilding myself, piece by piece. And every day, I'm reminded that I don't need to be afraid of starting over. I've learned to trust myself again. I've learned to love myself again. And the best part, I know that I will never allow someone to control me or manipulate me ever again. Daniel thought he could break me. He thought he could take everything from me. But in the end, all he did was make me stronger. Now, it's my time. The rest of my story is mine too, right? Thank you for following along with Anna's journey. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more real-life drama stories. We appreciate your support. Stay tuned for the next tale of truth, betrayal, and triumph.